Welcome back, boys and girls. Today we're going to cover a subject that was suggested to me by a listener, Julie, which I wholeheartedly agree it's a good topic. We've covered it once in our normal show. Kyle brought it up. Got my classic whiskey cigar here today to do this. But it's called the Mandela Effect. And it's a very interesting one because depending on what perspective one comes at the Mandela Effect, life either matches the reality that you remember or it doesn't match the reality that you remember. If it matches, then you don't understand the Mandela Effect at all. But if it doesn't match, you're sort of pissed off. So I've been trying to look at this from a bunch of different perspectives because at face value, here's what the Mandela Effect is. It's named after Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, for those of you who don't know history, was an activist in South Africa during apartheid, which is essentially the repression of the British colonies made up of all kinds of different Germans and everybody from Europe, repressing the blacks. All right, so the southern tip, which was a valuable trade route and just strategic location, was occupied by the whites, and they ran the place. And Nelson Mandela, just like Castro, led an uprising and was finally put in prison because he was causing change. And then, as I understand it, some people believe that he died a couple years into prison. They believe that they heard the news that he did die in prison. Then, of course, several years passes and he gets released, and he just died recently. So, I shouldn't say half, but a large percentage of people believe he died just recently, and probably a small percentage believe he died several years ago, nearly 2 decades ago, in prison in South Africa. And so they named this whole thing after him, the Mandela Effect. Then the other super-duper famous one, because I've checked them all out, and some of them seem almost silly, but I can't really say they seem silly, because I come from the perspective of having remembered them the way that they are today in this particular reality. I can't personally say, actually there's one that's silly that I'll go to next that I believe was just a misunderstanding of how it was titled, but the other one is a children's franchise made in Britain called the Berenstain Bears. Now, I didn't have this kind of stuff around me when I was a kid. I had, Danny and the Dinosaur, that's what I had. Wacky Wednesday, Freaky Friday, those are the books I grew up on. Hence, who I am today, right? But the Berenstein Bears is a whole little society of bears, and they, or at least a family of bears, and they travel around the world, and there's a series of books on them, and there's a television show based on it with a theme song and everything. Now, what people remember is it was Berenstein Bears. Stain is a British name, and Steen would be, I guess, a Jewish derivative. And so that's probably one of the areas where most people have a dispute, where we have the largest group of people that believe that it was one way versus the other way. So thus, we would say that's one of the largest examples of people who believe in the Mandela Effect. So there's all kinds of things that could play into that. And the one that I fell for was Sex in the City, the show on HBO, which real name is Sex and the City. But I tend to dismiss that because I just think, well, I mean, come on. It's and in. I mean, when spoken quickly, you're phonetically trying to hear people mumble anyway, right? Once you turn on closed captioning on your television, you'll understand how much actors mumble and how tough it is to get a well-spoken word into a camera. So it's not surprising to me that little tiny words are different. Now, but the Berenstain thing's a little bit different because little kids had books, and they stared at those books constantly, and they're burning them into their childhood memories. And so that one's a little more interesting. But we've also had people do research on this and realize that there's a localization issue about misunderstanding things. What's that mean? Localization is the word that refers to taking a foreign product, bringing it to a new region of the world, and localizing it to that world, rebranding it, respelling it, maybe sometimes, like when we made video games in Electronic Arts, we have a localization team. So we built it for Americans, and they get taken to various countries around the world. And, it's not terribly tough to localize it for foreign countries. There were weird things about Germany, they couldn't have red blood. It has to be green blood, and you couldn't do certain franchises about Nazis and that kind of stuff. So they would localize it away. They would maybe redress the soldiers to be aliens or something like that. And so you may actually have localization within the mind that's automatic. What's that mean? Berenstain is not a name that we have here in America. Now, Berenstein, I don't really think is very prominent in America, but we have Bernstein everywhere in America. So, what you need to know about America is that the Jewish community in America is always on the coast of either side of America. So, if you take America and you drill in maybe, 300 miles from a coast, you pretty much consumed all of the space where probably 95% of all Jews exist. Anything in the center, and I mean anything in the center, maybe Chicago, barely any Jews. So it'd be all the kids on those outer regions that would have a Jewish spelling in their name from going to school with buddies that are named Berenstein or Bernstein or any other Steen, right? So it could essentially be someone saying a word that you can't understand. Berenstain. When I first heard it from Kyle, I was like, what the hell last name is that? And they're like, oh, it's British. I was like, oh, okay. Makes complete sense. It's in Britain. But my brain as a 46-year-old man could not figure out where that name was from. It almost sounds like a fake word to me because I've never heard Berenstain in my life. I can't really say I've seen the Berenstein thing. But I think I've seen with the Berenstein Bears / Berenstain Bears. I'm trying to keep both groups happy watching this video. Is that I've seen it. Like I've seen the books, but it kind of looks like a Three Pigs book because it's got, the mama bear, daddy bear, baby bear thing. But now I'm just going to use my phone here as a reference for other every other Mandela Effect that's out there. Some of the more popular ones. We'll just go through them real quick. Some people believe that we actually did achieve 51 to 52 states in America, meaning Puerto Rico being one of them. And, of course, the District of Columbia being its own place. Some people believe that the Challenger explosion happened in 84 or 85 and not 86. I very vividly remember the 86 date myself personally. Well, this is interesting. Henry VIII portrait with a turkey leg in his hand. That sounds really familiar to me. Oh, this is a good one too. Jif or Jiffy peanut butter. I remember Jiffy. Oh yeah, New Zealand's location relative to Australia. A lot of us grew up with it on the left side, the west side of Australia, but it's actually in the southeast corner off the coast. So that's another big one. Oh, the other one is Thanksgiving Day here in America. Everybody remembers that it's the third Thursday of every November. But we also remember it as the 25th. So it's always the fourth week of November. The creator of the Peanuts, Snoopy and Charlie Brown, all those guys, his last name does not have a T in it. And I can swear to God I saw a T in it. Really, really weird, man. But you get my drift, right? A bunch of events occur, and we remember things differently. But when it happens on a group level, of group think, then we're concerned that something's going on with the universe, right? And the Mandela Effect really, it really starts to freak people out a little bit. Once you open your mind, you think, well, man, maybe the frequency of reality is adjusting. Maybe I'm in some frequency of experiencing the world, and as a group think mechanism, we all think in a certain way, and we wiggle out of this frequency of reality, and we go to a different frequency of reality. The other accusation is that perhaps something is actually tampering with reality. Now, I think that one's a little less. That one's a little less tough, or a little harder to believe. Let's put it that way, because if that's the case, and this would make it easy again to believe, it would be a test on mankind. It'd be a cognizant test as to how awake we are and how close-minded we are. So the real dilemma starts when the human mind goes for memory. And this is where we run into a lot of conspiracy deniers because this chemical trigger ends up occurring. When you remember something, put that in air quotes, okay? There's a chemical configuration that drops into your mind. Now, you know that when you remember something that you want to remember, for instance, there's this weird relief in your system. What's that actor's name? What's the name of that movie? And it's on the tip of your tongue for 30 seconds, and then remember it. It's almost like, you took a deep breath when you were drowning, It feels good. There's a relief. There's this weird feeling that is remembering something, and it's way different than taking in new information. When you're at the event of your dreams, you're at some concert, some event, and you're seeing with your own eyes what you think is utter magic, that's a different feeling. And that is the sort of the absorption of information. Now, imagine that something were to slip by and get put in your data banks that's not true. And then you remember it and you get those warm, fuzzy feelings that thing is associated with. Well, there you go. You have an addiction to that particular memory. My childhood was fantastic. Mine personally was. If I don't remember something that's awesome, I remember fireworks as a kid. Growing up in Kansas, getting closer and closer and closer to July 4th when we celebrate our independence. All the fireworks booths start setting up around town, and 1 week before the 4th, you're allowed to buy them. And you go up with your little bit of cash, and you buy stuff. And then you have a big pile at home, and you just dream about lighting them all on fire and blowing them up. Okay. Now, say that something gets in there that isn't actually correct. Through a localization misunderstanding, through maybe someone saying something. Let's go to the 51 states idea. I remember when I was a kid, the argument in the 70s about pulling Puerto Rico in as a 51st state. I never remembered it actually occurring, so I don't think there's 51 states, nor anything more than that. The reason why Puerto Rico was never brought in as a state is because it's a tax shelter. And the second it becomes a state of the United States of America, Apple can't hide all their money down there. Coca-Cola won't make all of its syrup there, right? Coca-Cola syrup, as I understand, is made in 2 places on planet Earth, and is only bottled at all the other bottling locations. But Puerto Rico's one, and Ireland's the other, because they're offered shelters, financial shelters in these 2 different countries. Okay. But imagine someone's talking about this, and they misunderstand the conversation and repeat it to people. Hey, Puerto Rico's a 51st state. Oh, great, wonderful. Now you've been told something that's incorrect by someone who misunderstood it in the first place. Now, it's in your memory, and every time you recall how many states there are in the United States, you say 51, and regardless if you know 1 through 50, 51st in your brain's Puerto Rico, because somebody told you that story. Imagine those who believe in the moon landings. They have a problem because they have various events that took place, television being the number one scientific proof that it occurred. And so when you talk to baby boomers who have vivid memories of going to the moon, they say, I saw it live on television. And that's scientific proof, not realizing that everything else, when they turn their channel dial, is a studio with lights and actors, right? And supposedly on that particular day, when NASA would not give the feed to any of the networks directly because it was Earth-to-Earth transmission, when NASA projected it on a white stucco wall and said, there it is, you can film that projection on a wall, people thought that was scientific proof. So that's the first dismissive take on the Mandela Effect, that we are simply misunderstanding things in large groups. And the anomaly of the Mandela Effect may simply be all of us in a large group remembering something wrong due to, mumbled words in songs like Sex and the City. It could simply be that a bad report goes out. How many times have celebrities died and they didn't die, and they have to now chase it away? I didn't die. People said I died. I didn't die. And someone like David Bowie dies, and you're like, oh my God, I'm waiting for the retraction. Now, again, because I don't personally have anything in the list except for maybe Sex and the City, which for me It's just like one of those 1,000 song lyrics that I didn't understand. Like you think it's one way, but it's actually the other way. In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida is a great one. In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida is actually the band saying in the Garden of Eden, but they were so utterly trashed in the music studio, it all slurred into one word, and so now they call it In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. Right? I love that story. But now let's get into the two alternate theories of a scientific explanation. One is that something is doing it to us. Something is coming into this world and changing reality and somehow not getting it correct. Now, the only scenario I can think of where something like a mistake like that, where someone has superior technology to be able to pull this off, but somehow they can't get a childhood book to move forward properly in the timeline. If that was intentionally done, the whole thing, the whole movement forward, a copy and paste of reality moving forward, I would think that there would be something more dire going on, that the need to copy and paste society and move them forward was something that was, impending doomish. And why do I say that? Because that would leave our captors, who mean us well for sure, struggling to get the information from the past to move it forward accurately. That's the way I believe it in my brain. And so they would struggle at times to move everything forward. Now, I would think, and this is just a hunch, that even I would have a huge Mandela effect. I would think almost every human being would have some form of a Mandela memory where something we know occurred one way and it didn't happen that way. But there might be something else more fundamental to the whole game. If you watch my time travel episode, and I forget what episode it is, you have a situation where I talk about time. Time is utterly an illusion to us, right? Time is a finite form of life, which I believe is the symbiotic human experience that we're having, right? I believe that our consciousness never dies. Why would it? I mean, there's no reason why it should die. But as long as we're humans, we have a beginning, middle, and end. And for us, that journey is coveted, short, it has meaning, it has purpose, and that's why I think it exists. That's why I think I think if nothing else, we designed it this way. Reincarnation being the absolute obvious take on this thing. We just simply go in loops, and we might be in different forms of life, but for now we're in our human form talking to each other. Well, I talked about also the booking technique in the CERN episode, where reality is essentially these infinite planes. If you think of them like pages in a book. And the next page, the next page, the next page is all stacked up on each other, above and below. And if talked about the time could simply be an infinite block of reality. And I give an example of a ball in a pachinko game in my time travel episode, in that the game itself doesn't change. The number of pins in the wall of a pachinko game don't change, but the ball bounces on the pachinko pins and has usually a infinitely different experience, regardless if it looks like it went down the same path, it's slightly different. We are falling through, potentially, a three-dimensional cube of all possible things that could ever happen. And since time most likely doesn't exist, there's no barrier between us occupying the same space at the same time and not meeting ourselves. There'd be no limitation to such a thing. That would be man's three-dimensional mind not being able to truly conceive of time being an infinitely dense concept as well. But why get into all this science? My assertion is the following. If the Mandela Effect is truly occurring, and it's not just a global misunderstanding due to regional misunderstandings and differences, we could simply be changing what page we're on in this infinitely dense construct that is time and space relative to us, right? And so you could have grown up with Berenstain Bears. You could have grown up with the space shuttle blowing up 2 years earlier than it did in this particular time frame. And you really did live in that time frame. In fact, you could live in the time frame where the moon missions really occurred. And I live in the ones where they were completely fake. Some people can't believe in conspiracies, and maybe they live in the world where those conspiracies didn't occur, and we live in the ones that people did. And maybe we even coexist now. That in the 60s, they lived through a full Lee Harvey Oswald believable story. And us baby boomer children, the X-Geners and millennials, we grew up in the world where it became revealed in a different way. But now, would we notice us personally switching from one frequency page to another page? I really don't think we would. Unless you kind of went to bed and you had that chair that you bought for your apartment or your house, and man, you really looked all over planet Earth for it, and it was a red chair. It's just your favorite red chair, and you wake up the next morning, the damn thing was white. And that would be very noticeable. You would have noticed your change from one frequency to another. And so, let's get to the physics of how this is possible, and the people that have actually tracked such a thing and suggested that we not only endorse this possibility, but we use it to our advantage. Now, this is going to sort of go off topic of the Mandela Effect, but I really want to say that if you're into the Mandela Effect, what I'm about to say might become far more interesting and far more useful to your life. If you can control what frequency that you're in, instead of being the ball in the pinball machine where bumpers are telling you what to do, you control it yourself. Now, there's two pieces of reference out there you guys can go check out. Some of you have looked into The Secret. The Secret is sort of a boiled down version of The Bigger Picture, which is a film created, What the Bleep Do We Know? What physicists have done is essentially proven in a laboratory that when matter is observed, it behaves different than when matter is not observed. And you might be asking yourself, what the hell are you talking about? Well, one of the chief experiments that they do in the world in physics is to take a laser and they use it to project mass at a target. The target's pretty accurate. It's like a mini CERN inside of a laboratory, and they watch where the laser hits the target. Through sheer serendipity, they'd run the machine not looking at it, and it would hit a bullseye of a particular kind every single time. Of course, why would it change? But when they looked at it with their human eyes, it would always change trajectory. And it was always consistently hitting a different bullseye. And that freaked them out. That when humans observe reality, humans subjectively change mass and energy. And I did a whole summer's worth of research on this. You've heard 100 million times that, reality is nothing but a bunch of frequencies, right? We know this for a fact. There is no such thing as mass. Mass is simply just slow-moving energy. Everything is just pure energy. It's not an electron, it's not a proton, not a neutron. It is pure, unadulterated, fundamental particle energy. And it is merely the collisions that this fundamental energy has on itself that creates different trajectories, that creates different orbits. And we simply and merely classify those interactions and those velocities and trajectories to call it a particular thing over another. And that's why the guy that did Coral Castle said that at the center of every atom, it's a photon, a light particle. And he said, when ether hits this photon, which is really the more fundamental particle we're talking about here, as it hits it, it bounces off and creates this illusion that there's these other atomic particles in there. What simply happens is there's a unified configuration of mass to create a hydrogen atom, right? Your dielectric and electric fields around an electron, for instance, which once they collide, they give you electromagnetism, right? You take a photon and you hit it with ether, and it's going to bounce off at a particular perpendicular trajectory from center. And that's going to be your dielectric energy. Well, there's going to be another group that orbits around that center photon, and we're going to call that, magnetism. Combined together, when dielectric and the magnetism gets together, you have electromagnetism, Why get into all that? Well, our ability to observe things is we are a projector of reality, and a lot of you have studied the holographic universe. Now, you think about the construction of the brain, and we have a bone bedroom that we put our brain in and our consciousness in. And we use eyeballs, and so we feel like a little bit that we live inside of our brains, right? We feel that our consciousness is backed up by the pineal gland. Well, we know how our eyeballs work, right? Eyeballs are more permeable and open because there's a bone cavity that's open. Our eyeballs sit inside that bone cavity, and a bunch of electricity, this fundamental energy bounces into our eyeballs, gets lensed into the retina, and we actually see things, right? And it's mapped onto the back of the brain upside down and backwards, and we translate that to the reality that we see. And our brain does it correctly, because if the brain didn't flip it around, vertically and horizontally, then we have a problem that we start bumping into everything. And so our brain simply kept mulching the data until we knew where a three-dimensional object was in front of us, so we didn't walk off a cliff or bump into a rock. But now imagine the dish of a satellite. Now, a satellite is a concave dish that grabs beams from outside and focuses on a central receptor, and you get direct TV, or satellite television. All right. But now imagine it also being a projector out of what comes in. So a bunch of energy hits the back of our eyes, bounces off the bone cavity, and not only is harvested in the retina to give us reality, but a giant portion of it's coming out of us. Almost like a Marvel character with laser eyes, or fire eyes or something, right? Well, human beings, we are the evolutionary, regardless of what you believe, we were fish, right, that were face down, looking down at the bottom of a body of water, most likely. Our upper backs were exposed to the sun, and that's why we got the resilient vertebrae that we have. And that's why we have the tender underbelly, because we didn't have these emissions from space hitting our belly. As we rose up and walked out of the water and became upright, we don't have to be monkeys, people, but as we became upright, we have the same vertebrae as every other creature on Earth. And that's why our bellies are so vulnerable and our backs are so resilient. Well, you take that construct, that human skeletal form and any other bodily form of an animal, and you project into it waves of energy. It is literally going to bounce it back out to reality. So if everything that we see in life is energy, or our body is built to project it back out in some form, we're going to absorb most of it, but we're going to reflect some of it out, right? But now we also know that our entire body has a frequency. Some of you have seen those old videos of the bridges they built in the 30s before they realized that wind shear on a bridge can get to a point in high wind scenarios where it matches the frequency of the construction of the bridge. And you have those videos where the bridges were, shaken like leaves in a tree, right? Leaves on a tree, or like a scarf on a clothesline. And a lot of the bridges, finally wiggled themselves apart and fell into the ocean down below, or the river. And we learned how to reconstruct things at higher frequencies that wind never gets to, so this problem would never happen. Well, now imagine that the human body has a similar situation, but instead of being wind that might, vibrate at a frequency, your car also has that too. When you drive up to a certain miles per hour, something in your car starts wiggling on the outside, it starts driving you nuts. At 85, the fender starts shaking because it's not bolted down properly anymore. But imagine something starts happening to the human consciousness, whereby your consciousness, not your body necessarily, but your consciousness vibrates at such a frequency that you actually switch over a little bit. You go from page 60 to page 62. On page 60, it was Berenstein, and on page 62, it's Berenstain. But most everything else in the entire version of page 62 is exactly like page 60. But this one thing switched. A lot of you have been in a situation in your life where either you wanted something to occur or you wanted something not to occur. And there was this weird moment in consciousness where either you got it or you avoided it. And you felt like you controlled it. I'm going to tell you a story that is 100% true, and it occurred twice in my life under witness of 3 other people, both times. And it really calls into this and really gives it validity. When I role-played as a kid, actually in my 20s, I didn't get a chance to role-play as a kid, but one time. And in my 20s, I was working at various game companies, and my good friends were the master Dungeons and Dragons players. Just brilliant minds. I mean, imagine walking into a Tolkien novel that's actually interesting, and that's your dude telling you everything that's occurring. And here's what happened twice. For those of you not familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, it works like this. Your dude in front of you tells you where you are, and you tell him what you do, and he simply tells you what happens. So the whole thing is like essentially living in a book, a choose-your-own-adventure book. Except that eventually you'll run into monsters that need to be fought, be it humanoid or animal. And then we get dice out to figure out how we actually end up doing damage to these folks. But the very first die that you roll to figure out whether or not you hit an enemy is a 20-sided die. Now, I just want you to think about that for a second. That's not like your 6-sided die, where it's like Yahtzee. There's, no matter what you get on a 6-sided die, you're not that amazed because it's 1 in 6 chance. You could probably predict it half the time. But on a 20-sided die, you got 1 in 20 chance of ever getting the one that you want. Now, here's the thing. If you roll a 1, that means you swung your weapons so badly, or you shot your arrow so badly, that you drop it. In fact, you might even have to roll a saving throw to figure out whether or not you broke your sword. But if you roll a 20, you get double damage. Here's what happened to me twice. When my dungeon master, the guy telling me the story, who's this brilliant dude, got the story to a point I really cared. And I'll just tell you the story. I was an elf, got another elf with me and some other races with me, and we went deep underground into the inner Middle Earth world, and we found this river. And on the river were various communities that lived, and the place was illuminated because there was moss that was actually glowy. And we got to this saloon, and we find out the place has been ransacked by some foreign force, right? And there was a young girl who had been raped and murdered behind this bar. And he described her body in unbelievable detail. I mean, the sexual perversion of what these people did to her, how she was maimed, how she was murdered. And it was very, very much into... We'd already been playing for a couple hours, so you sort of fall into the story, just like when you watch television. The television monitor usurps your vision, and you live in it, right? So I'm totally in this moment, and my character was very upset that this occurred. I could feel it in myself, right? So we punch out, we go back to the river, and we walk down the river, and very soon after that, we find a group of orcs who have set up camp, and we can tell that they're the ones that ransacked the town because they have town possessions on them. There was a leader on a makeshift throne that's obviously carried with them, so he can sit there. He's like the commanding officer of some sort, and I was pissed. It was very recent, less than maybe 10 minutes ago, I heard about this girl being raped, and she's an elf, and I'm an elf, and there's just loyalty there, right? So I do what my character would do, because he wasn't exactly that brilliant. He would just haul off and kill this guy. So I tell the group, I go after him. And there's all these orcs around. And so if I get in there, I might die just out of, 1,000 needles. But I just bolt towards this guy. And the guy was like, oh, okay. He goes, all right, well, when you get to him, roll your 20-sided die. And I pick up this 20-sided die. And this is where we get into this controlling your destiny thing. And I remember holding it in my hand. It's a big-ass die, so you got to hold it and cup it. And I'm rolling this die. And I am so into the story and so into the imperative need to kill this guy that would lead these people into this raping frenzy that I kid you not, reality itself went from this variable thing that I didn't control to 100% wrapped around me. And it was like I lived in this mirror of projection of what was outside my visual cortex. The peripheral vision I had was as if I was living inside of a crystal ball, and my friends were merely just this distorted image in the outside, right? With the room and everything built in. And I simply said, this is going to be a 20. And I called it out loud. I've only called it out twice, and I've only had it twice. And boom, goes down to 20. Just boom. Now, you might think, oh, coincidence. All right. The feeling that precedes this 20, and again, I never called it unless I had this incredible feeling, this incredible illusion of this ball around me. And, I sliced the guy in half. He's dead. And my guys come in, we wiped these dudes out because everyone's in the same state of mind, and I started off the whole game with a 20. And so we win. And I think it wasn't until the second time it occurred. I can't remember what the second time was. We did it again. I had the feeling again. I called it out again. I never called it. You can always say, please give me a 20. That's different than saying this is going to be a 20. But I called it out again. And when it occurred the second time, several weeks later, maybe months later, I looked at my buddy and I said, I'm controlling these dice. This is really weird. Like, I am completely controlling reality. And my buddy looked at me and he goes, yeah. And the other two dudes are listening to him. He goes, yeah, you can control the dice. Let's keep playing. And these three guys just looked at me like, yeah, that's the way it works. When you play really, really well and you're really vested, you control the dice. You control reality. And so I'm sitting there going, holy shit, I'm in this new club of reality. Almost like some Masonic club of dudes who know that this is the way it works. Now, consequently, in the several years I played with them, they never called a 20 like that. And they never got one like that. So I did it twice. It's weird. It's like, again, the two first games I played a 9-ball at my boss's house. He simply told me, put the 9-ball in the pocket and you win the game if you do it on the break. And I did it. He just told me to do it, so I just did it. It went into the side pocket. He shits his pants. He puts a $20 bill down and says, see if you can do that again. And I did it again. I got the $20. And the second that I didn't have to do it, I wasn't offered $20. It just played a normal game. What I'm trying to tell you is that you can control reality to the degree that you feel like you should be able to control reality. That's what the secret's about. The secret is about seeing reality the way you want it to be and studying it so much that the greatest gift you have from whatever creator that we have is you get to pick the destiny that you're going to live in, the world that you're going to live in, the fortune that you're going to live in. And every once in a while, you'll psych yourself out and you'll go down a negative path on accident, or you won't even realize that you let yourself into a little bit of a negative path. And, you'll cause yourself a little bit of strife. People that live in bad bodies. They're always sick. They're always unfortunate. And the people that live in the exact opposite. They live in they can eat anything they want. They never get fat. They never get sick. And they always get the jobs and every opportunity in life because that's how they view their life. And they don't have to be super intelligent. In fact, being the idiot savant is one of the ways to get that kind of life. It's interesting, right? But the secret is sort of the boiled down version of that particular paradigm of predicting and controlling what you want in life. What the Belief Do We Know takes it up to another notch of physics and biology. The physics side of it is what I told you, that we observably had seen that when humans observe things, we change things. And I just gave you this idea that maybe we project reality out of our cavities, But the other one is something called a neuropeptide. For those who aren't familiar with that, that is a peptide that is essentially like a stem cell. It uses the conscious thought of mankind to form what it is going to do in your body. And these peptides fall out of your brain, go over your body, and give you the body and the mind that you want. You may have heard motivational speakers say, it's best that you not say, I'm not going to be fat anymore. Because within that sentence, you say, I am fat. Even though you have some negatives in there to switch the polarity of the alignment, you're still hearing the word I am fat. So what they say is they want you to project, well, thank God I'm healthy. I really love my slim body. Always talk in the past tense of your goal. And eventually you create a frequency in your mind that your neural peptides start following that new belief system, that you are thin, that you can eat anything that you want. Aren't you glad that your metabolism has never slowed down? I never get confused. I love the fact I never get confused. I love the fact that I'm really smart. All those things will get you to the point where you can really be that way. And that's what being positive is all about. But you just don't want to carry a noun or a verb from a negative reality into the vision that you want to have happen. Now, the one thing that's, I'll just put a disclaimer in there, the What the Bleep Do We Know movie is fantastic, and it's weird. It's filmed in Canada. It's about a woman who I believe is deaf, who lives a life, and they keep watching her live her life, and then they switch back to the physicist and have interviews about sort of this fictitious life she's living. Now, there's one candidate in the movie that's this weird woman. And her qualification, her little title in the bottom corner, I believe at one point said like channeler or psychic or something like that. So when you see her up there, you're going to have Planet X thoughts, people talking to aliens from different planets and that kind of stuff. Luckily, in the film, she never talks about anything that is, I believe, that is related to her title, which is like, get this woman out of this incredibly, beautifully factual movie, right? But now we talk about several times on the film, or on the show, that in the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of things going on that seemed like man was about to go to the next level, and that it was all slammed shut. Anti-gravity being a big one. We had gravity figured out. We knew how to use electromagnetism to disturb the ethereal clouds to create weightlessness. We knew how to do it. But then it went away. One of the other things that went away was mind over matter. This exact subject I'm talking about. There is a Twilight Zone called Mind Over Matter. And it's about a grumpy guy that goes to work every day. He's a sociopath, single man. And every day he goes to work, this young kid spills coffee on him and just, pisses him off. And eventually the kid says, look, I'm really sorry for spilling this stuff on you. I really look up to you, and I want to give you a gift. And he gives him a gift of a book called Mind Over Matter. And he tells the old man, he goes, look, it just says, my buddies used to use this, and he said you can really control reality and get what you want out of life. He says, okay. So he takes the book home, reads it, I guess, and says, I'm going to get rid of all these people, all these degenerate losers. And sure enough, he says a little mind over matter prayer, and New York City becomes quiet as a church bell, as a church mouse, not a bell. That'd be stupid. But he goes outside and he goes to work the next day, and there's no one in the subways, no one in the streets, no one at work, no one spills coffee on him. But then he realizes, damn, that's boring as hell. I need people. He goes, I just need them to be like me. And so he says another little mind over matter chant, and all of a sudden everyone shows up and they look exactly like him. The same actor plays all these roles in drag and all this other stuff. It's really brilliantly done for the late 50s, early 60s. I can't remember what season it's in. I tend to think it was in the season 4, which you're not going to be able to see on Netflix, but maybe it's a half an hour. But eventually, he realizes that he's a pain in the ass, and the last thing he wants to be with is a bunch of copies of himself. And so he wishes everything back to the way it was, goes to work, the kid spills the coffee on him, and the kid finally, he's so happy to be there, he doesn't get pissed off anymore. And the kid asks him about the book, and he goes, oh, it's all just poppycock. It doesn't work. Of course, it totally worked. Now, I have a close friend of mine who was alive and well in the mid-50s and early 60s. Very sentient man, very brilliant man. He got into this as well because it went around. It went around in the upper echelon of thoughts in academia in the mid-50s, early 60s. And he said he got a book about the same sort of thing, and it trains you to control reality. I've never seen these books, but the concept's pretty clear. But he said that he got to the point where he was controlling his reality at a minute level of responsibility that he didn't want to have. And he said that he got to a point once where he drove to a 4-way intersection, and he felt that feeling I had when I had the die in my hand and was rolling the 20. That he was responsible for every single car safely going through that intersection of the 4-way stop. And he said, I concentrated on getting everybody through that 4-way stop, but he goes, after that, I never went back and toyed with that stuff because he goes, I was just too in control of everything. My mom in the 80s got into that stuff. I don't know how, but she's the last person on earth to believe in anything conspiratorial, and I mean anything. And she said that she used to go to this bank, and she would have to ride elevators a lot, and she said it got to the point where she could always predict who was coming out of the elevator, and it freaked her out. And it's not just sheer chance, I guess, be 4 or 5 times in a day, which would be weird. So you can do this, is why I'm saying this to you. You can get to the point where you control your reality. Now, I had a situation that happened the day before 9/11 that to this day it almost pisses me off. Because I don't want to be in this reality with 9/11 being something that occurred, either be it official story or conspiracy. On September 10th, 2001, I was spending the night at my girlfriend's house. And went in her place. It's all white and pretty. And It was one of those situations where we had a nightstand light on and we're all up to our necks in sheets, two of us. And I'm really enjoying life. I mean, I'm at the top of my game. I'm paid well. I have an incredible department of people, and what EA was working on was fantastic. And we were about to launch EA.com. Everything was really cool. And there were some strife at work because it was a tough project, but nothing that, it was out of the norm because it was a little more tougher to build than anything else I've ever built in my life. But, it was sort of what you would expect. It's nothing really intense. And I simply said, I had this feeling, and I said, I'm looking at the ceiling, this popcorn ceiling, and I said, it wasn't popcorn, but it was one of those sprayed stucco ceilings. And I said, I feel like something bad's about to happen. And then I saw in the sky, in this ceiling, I saw two planes do this, go one up, one down, right next to each other, which makes no sense to the day of what we think happened. We don't think planes actually were involved much. They were involved, but not maybe once they hit the tower. Go look up the no planar theory if you have any questions about that. But then I said to her, I think it's going to have to do with planes. And she said, I remember what she said. She goes, yeah, me too. I'm like, whoa, okay, weird. And then, of course, the next morning I was in utter and complete shock. And I had forgotten that I had said that for quite some time. But it was so vivid and so weird that I just had this premonition. And I'm going to give you an analogy of how this booking thing might work, right? The planes of existence that are stacked up on each other. If you want to do this experiment, I highly recommend you do this. And you can give this analogy to plenty of people in your life, at a bar, whatever, at a restaurant. And it's pretty mind-blowing. Get yourself a normal, traditional, square, white napkin made of paper. Get a ballpoint pen and do me a favor. Draw an X, halfway in one axis. Draw a ballpoint pen line. So right down the center of the napkin. Then rotate it 90 degrees and do another line. So you have this perfect X in the center of your napkin from edge to edge. Sort of a bullseye. Now, if you want to complete this, pick one of the lines, go over a centimeter or half an inch, and draw another line that's parallel to one of the two lines that you've got. That's this X in the middle of your napkin. Now, find a colored liquid. Now, if you're at a restaurant, you can use soda. It's better if it has a color. If you're at home and you really want to do this one right, get some sort of Kool-Aid, some really bright red, or get some food coloring or something. Take a straw and put it in the liquid. You plug it with your fingers so you can hold some of the liquid in there. Just get another centimeter or half an inch worth of liquid and go over to the X where the two main lines collide. Drop it. Drop it right in the center of the napkin and let it diffuse out from the center. Now, I want you to think about yourself being on the first line that you drew in the napkin that's going to go right down the center of the napkin, especially with the one that's got the other line parallel to it. The one that's dead center is the one you're on. Now, think about yourself on a timeline within the page of reality. This napkin is your plane of existence. You are traveling towards the center of the napkin. Now, what happened at the center of the napkin? Well, an event occurred. You dropped some liquid, some colored liquid in the center of the napkin. But you very well know that if you were a little tiny microscopic human walking on that ballpoint pen ink, that you would start feeling the moisture of what you dropped and the coloring of what you dropped way before you get to the center. That is where we get premonitions. The frequency of what actually occurred at the center of the napkin has bled out to the pre-existing time frames and the post-existing time frames of the event actually occurring. So the reason why you can feel something occur isn't magic. It's simply that the frequency of that horrific event, the bigger the event is and the more it disturbs people in reality, the bigger this shockwave is going to be from the center. The reason why I think I felt the little kid in the kitchen who was hurt, 9/11, was that I was feeling it, the ripples of it before it happened, and it echoed of the sentiment of the actual truth that was in it, meaning planes were going to be involved. Not planes are going to hit towers, planes are going to be involved and something bad was going to occur. The frequency of badness was almost upon me. When I was sitting in that bed, September 10th, a bunch of people were planning 9/11. No matter who they were planning to do it. They were ready. They were nervous. Their palms were sweating. They probably didn't sleep for 2 or 3 days before the event occurred. Right? I think Building 7 was the mastermind location of the whole thing. It'd be good to get some surveillance footage of the window lights in Building 7 the days before, right? But then it occurs, and then it doesn't occur. After that, we have this residual experience of it occurring where we're in trauma. Now you understand how time might work. But let's go back to the napkin and the third line that you drew to the right of one of the centered lines, right? The one you just went down. Now you have an interesting path that's going on. You're now going to travel on this ballpoint pen line. You're going to start feeling the halo of the event of 9/11, but what's going to change? What's going to change is that it never happens. But when you're just 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch to the right of this epicenter of the event occurring, you're going to feel the strongest feeling ever that something bad almost happened. And that's when we have that feeling that we have to be careful. The intuition of feeling careful towards a horrific event might be the way that we jump from that center line that's going to hit 9/11 to the line that's just a centimeter over, that is the line that doesn't hit it. I give you some real world examples. Probably just one is enough, right? Which is the following. In the Midwest, in Kansas, in America, we have these 2-lane highways everywhere. I'm sure Europe is just packed full of them. In England, during the winter time, there's a couple different weather examples that occur. We have something called black ice, which is when ice freezes so perfectly that you don't see it's there. And it looks like a dry highway, but the whole highway is just as slick as anything, right? People die on it all the time because their cars start hitting black ice. Their car starts twirling out of control. And if there's a big semi coming the other way, he is so heavy, he's crushing the black ice most of the time. But you slide into his grill and you die. The other one is that it's just a snowy road, and they've actually plowed it, but it's still so snowy, the same sort of event occurs. Or it's still snowing really, really badly, and no one's out to plow, and you got to get from point A to point B in your mind so badly that you're going to risk your life. There's been at least 2 times in my lifetime, probably more, where I was riding as a child with my mom driving, and it just suddenly felt really dangerous, like I could die any minute. Especially if you see a big rig coming the other way, you just start being concerned. He's going to lose control, I'm going to lose control, someone else is going to lose control, and we're going to end up having an impact, and I'm going to die, or be really injured, or someone I love is going to die. And for those of us who've had that feeling profoundly, we're tuned into the frequency of the universe. We feel that discoloration and that moisture in the napkin before we actually get to the epicenter of the event. Our brains can say, get us off this ballpoint line. This is the line that dies. Get us to the page, right, in the book. That's if I'm going to die on page 60, I want to get to 61 or above, or 59 and below, because that's where we can survive the situation. Maybe the next 2 pages over you get hit, but you live, but you're maimed. So you want to jump enough pages away that you don't die. You don't have to have, no one gets hurt. And I believe that that's occurred before I understood the physics of the situation. The bottom of the line is that we're all frequencies. Every single thing is a frequency. That's what David Icke goes on about, because he's read it places. And it's true. Holographic universe is nothing more than a bunch of frequencies colliding in the universe. So the Mandela Effect has 3 possibilities, which is we all remembered it wrong. And because of our regional, localized belief systems and understanding and references of what phonetics coming out of people's mouths could possibly be mapped to, again, a bunch of Americans that don't understand Berenstain, but they live in New York City, and they've heard Bernstein and maybe even Berenstein their whole life, they think it's Berenstein. Websites that actually have web pages named after the Berenstein, they'll be like Berenstein.html, and then inside is all the content that's Berenstain. That's simply because a human being typed that file name wrong, and then eventually figured out it was Berenstain. The other one is sort of a dark city analogy, which for those of you who haven't seen the movie, it's brilliant. It's a floating city like Flat Earth. It's a disk. It's a city inside. It's always nighttime. there are, just like a video game, there's barriers around this disc, and you can't exit the disc, and no one really tries. Everyone has the belief system that they have recently traveled outside of the town. They grew up outside of the town, and so they just don't question. They love the fact they're in this city. But at night, when everything goes to bed, again, it's never daytime, that's why it's called Dark City, everyone goes to sleep except for this one guy. And I think Kiefer Sutherland's character plays a doctor. And you see these black trench coat aliens. They're essentially humanoid, but the heads are kind of small, sort of like the mythical characters on the internet. And they rearrange bodies. And they take you from being a mayor to being a janitor to being something else. And they are essentially doing what they call tuning. And they're trying to figure out the essence of man so that they can save their own culture, their own species, I should say. And eventually, our main character, who never ends up going to sleep anymore, pieces it together and takes them on at the end. And it's a really, really cool ending. But that's sort of your second scenario of the Mandela Effect, is that there's some sort of alien race, perhaps, for those of you who believe in Flat Earth, the dome controllers, adjusting things for some reason. But I would say that if that was the case, the mistakes are simply a matter of attrition from the difficulty of doing so. And not because they're trying to see if we recognize it. But maybe there would be a reason to say, let's see how many people remember this. We'll find out how many people are asleep or how many people are awake. But, the insinuation is that the majority of people who remember Berenstain, whether that be 51% or more, aren't necessarily wrong. They might just be from the page in the book that was written with Berenstain. And Berenstein, again, doesn't make any localized sense with a British book as much as Berenstain does. But the third one, if it's not just a bunch of misunderstandings like our first scenario, is that we as human beings, collectively or individually, somehow switch pages in this infinitely dense, packed book of planes of existence. We simply vibrate our frequency to another reality. There would seem to be a possibility that would be the case. Now, if you listen to my time travel episode, we're gonna deal with some of the logistics of the typical time paradoxes, which is to say, if I'm on page 50 and there's a page 65 that's more appealing to me and I want to get to 65, the big question is, what happens to the me that's on 65? Am I displacing the me on 65? Or is there no limitation to how many me's can exist on the page 65? I happen to believe the latter. There wouldn't be any man-made essential limitation. Actually, what I was talking about was actually time travel and the building of a UFO. And when you hyperspace your vehicle to another space, you have to take what was there and move it to where you are, that sort of thing. You bring some super virus from some deep place in the universe and throw it into your backyard. So I think that's the major benefit of thinking through the Mandela Effect. So I think you feel me. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. A couple things that we've added to the site. I'm just going to say this different type of bumper for a little while because I don't know where you guys are coming in. We used to just have the MK Ultra Radio Facebook page, so facebook.com/MK Ultra Radio. We now have facebook.com/Deep Thoughts Radio as a separate page for this particular show. I'm going to be turning this into, and I'm asking for your help as well, more of sort of like your coast-to-coast channel of consciousness. I want ancient history. I want really just things to expand the mind. Anything that gets super controversial or current events is going to be pushed over to the MK Ultra Radio page, which is more of your Alex Jones thinking, the acidic stuff. So on our page, it's all going to be about becoming more talented, thinking, and hive-minding, a consciousness that's really fun to be in, So if you go to mkultraradio.com, we have links to both those pages. We've now taken the website and split it in half. So you have a page for one and a page for the other, a feed for one, a feed for the other. I actually took the Deep Thoughts out of the normal MK Ultra Radio feed. And so you can go to the Deep Thoughts feed and you don't have... Basically, both of the groups can live in their own channel. Now, Kyle did move about 40 minutes north, and he was already 45 minutes north. That's why the show is sort of dead over in the MK Ultra Radio section, because it's a lot harder to get together. So we are going to try to use some of this beautiful weather that we're having to record some shows. But we're also sort of, both of our industries are in that transitional period of the year. And so we have to get off of previous projects and go into next projects. There's a lot of searching involved with doing that. So that's sort of the stage that both of us are in. So I can do these in my backyard when I have a cigar and a weekend, or maybe a really early morning recording. So that's why these are going to continue coming out. I do have quite a few shows in the queue still, but I have been pumping them out a lot faster to get them out of my queue. So I believe I have a depopulation one in there, and I can't quite remember the other ones that I have in the queue. I just released Love, so I'm going to release this one tonight, hopefully, or actually I just put out Love, so I'll wait a day and put this one out. This is going to be in that nice little science area, so I'll try to find something else that's out there, but you guys are giving me these great comments. Thank you, Julie, for this recommendation. I think it's a great one. Hope this was valuable for you guys. As always, go find a way to take care of yourself and somebody else. Dial into that page of reality that you want for your life. Don't argue too much with people that remember it different than you. Maybe they're just from a different plane of existence, including people that don't believe in conspiracies. Anyway, I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.